As we talk through the various response gathering options for doing your polling, one of the newest, and at this point, one of the best, is texting. So I'm here with our data wizard, Abe Levy, to talk through how could you utilize this, what is it, and how can you utilize this method for your polling. First, it's really the what. So talk us through what is this? What is texting for polling?
So instead of calling people, you're just shooting them a text. It's going to be using what we call peer-to-peer texting, where someone is on one end hitting a send button to connect with potential participants for a poll.
Yeah, and still the same rules apply. So how you push these out, there are some things you need to do. Make sure you have a reputable person you're working with for your polling, like us. We'll make sure you're doing the texting properly, because there are ways you can run afoul of the FCC on this method, so be careful. That said, there's a couple ways to do this. There's running the poll entirely over text. Yep. This is something that we were dubious on because it's just a lot of back and forth, especially if you've got 10, 15, 20 questions. But I will say that people are starting to embrace the technology more and more. And so while early on, I don't think doing your full poll over text was necessarily a viable option, it's starting to become a viable option. We're seeing it more and more that people are willing to do it.
Exactly. It does, as Collin said, it does take a little bit longer, especially when you have high quantity of questions. And with that, costs go up because you pay for every message that's exchanged.
Yeah, but there are two other options, though, that we do a lot more that tend to work very well. Go ahead.
Yep. So the second option is texting like a link for them to go to an online forum to participate. And that's been very effective. And then the third is basically circling them back to the automated system, where you give them a number that they can call and dial into to participate.
And you can just make it set where they can just click it. So what Abe's talking about is text to web and text to IVR. The idea being is the text now gets us the consent. When they click, they're giving you consent. So before, the problem with automated is you can't do automated calls to, without consent, somebody's cell phone. But by texting them and saying, hey, would you take the survey? Click here, it'll get you into our system. Now that's your consent, and now you can do it all automated. So it's getting you that benefit of the automated pricing, because automated is so much cheaper than doing live, and then adding that one little cost for the text and the consent at the beginning. So it's a way to sort of cheat and still use IVR and take advantage of all those cheap costs you get with automated polling. And so those are those options. So you can use texting to run the full poll. You can use it to push them to an online form to take the poll, or you can use it to push them to an automated system. In either case, it's all initiated by a text message. We answered that properly? That's a good way to describe it?
Yes, sir.
All right, my data guy approves, so we did good. All right, let's talk through the advantages and disadvantages of this method. First, the advantages. What's the good of taking advantage of this method?
Well, it's hitting people that don't have landlines. When you don't have the biggest budget to do live calls or anything like that, but you can consider doing text messaging, you have a little bit of cash for that. It allows you to hit those people that don't have landlines.
Which is more and more nowadays.
Exactly. So the costs aren't that high, and it's really easy to do.
Yeah, so cost is going to be higher than automated, but much less than live. So cost we'd consider an advantage. Maybe not as much of an advantage, but still an advantage. But I think accuracy is a big thing here, right? I mean, it's a highly accurate way to do your polling, and accuracy is, of course, really important in polling. So expand on that a little bit for us.
Yeah, so I mean, people generally don't share cell phone numbers, so you know exactly who you're talking to. If you're trying to target a certain type of voter, or maybe just women or just men or a certain age group, you know exactly what you're sending those texts to. And when those people respond, you know that if it matches, you're good.
Yeah, which helps a lot with your modeling and weighting on the back end. That respondent match is huge. And so it's one of the biggest benefits of texting is that respondent match. It gives you highly accurate results. And then when you have your data experts go in there and do their modeling and weighting, they know exactly what they're working with. Whereas some of the other methods, they don't have that match. There's not as much confidence in the demographics they're looking at, because people might self-select and say, hey, I'm this, I'm that. They could be wrong, or they could just be screwing with you. And there's nothing you can do about it. When it comes to respondent match, we don't have to worry about any of those problems. So it's a big benefit. All right, what are the disadvantages of gathering your responses over texting?
So far, I don't want to call it unreliable, but you're kind of flipping a coin on how effective it's going to be when you're sending out like 10,000 texts to get responses. There's no So far, in our experience, there hasn't been a lot of consistency with the number of responses we get back for every 1,000 texts we send out. That being said, it is getting better every time we do it. People are becoming a lot more receptive to that. But one of the other disadvantages would be the time it takes. You need someone on the other end sending those text messages just because that's the law. You can't send automated texts. So you need to spend time sending those texts and then wait for people to respond.
Yeah. And there are some ways around that, especially if you're a C3 or a government entity, you can get away a little more with some of those rules. But either way, Abe's correct. The time here, it is a slower method, both with how long it takes to get responses back and get people to fill it out. The benefit to them is you're letting them do it on their time. The detractor to you is that you're letting them do it on their time. So it does take longer to get those responses in. And to Abe's point, the response rate is still lower. It is getting better. It is climbing. This is an emerging method, an emerging technology in this space. And so not everybody has fully embraced it. And to Abe's point, in some places we do this, we get tons of responses right away. In other areas of the country, we get fewer responses and slower responses. So we envision in 2, 3, 4 years, it's going to be great and probably the number one way people do polling unless another new technology comes out. We're just not quite there yet. So start to take advantage of it, but maybe don't rely on it fully. I mean, one of the things we tell our clients is use multiple response gathering methods anyways, not just because in this case you're probably going to need it because you won't get to 500 or 1,000 with texting. It's just better for accuracy's sake. But in this case, because you probably won't reach your respondent count just with texting, you kind of have to use multiple methods, right?
Exactly.
But there are benefits to doing those multiple methods. So it's something you would suggest anyways?
Yeah, I mean, especially if if someone comes to us and they want to do a fully automated, we'll push for, throw some lives in there. Let's integrate a panel, and if budget is an issue, texting will be the first thing that we push their way because it's not as expensive as a lot of the other options.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so now last thing is thinking through how can you utilize this for your polling? Some advice for our clients, our potential clients, and how could they take advantage of texting within the space of accomplishing what they're looking to accomplish for their goals? Any thoughts on that and how to work it in, maybe what types of polls this is best for, where you've seen it really be effective?
The most effective we've seen it is with any sort of community engagement kind of polls where it's about issues that are more local and that people are already aware of. People are a lot more, especially when when you get a text message, if it's something that you've never heard of or from a group that you've never heard of, you're just going to spam. You're just going to ignore it. But if it's about something that you maybe saw on the news recently or a new referendum for school, you're going to be a lot more interested and you're going to buy right in and participate. And
that's something to know because when it comes to live or automated, the majority of your costs are when people start to take the poll. That's the minutes. But when it comes to texting, you're paying for that text. So ultimately, you're paying whether they respond or don't respond. And so it's even more important for texting than any of the other methods to think through when it makes sense to use texting. And so to Abe's point, those polls that we've seen that people are more willing to take over text, they're more excited about, more interested in, that makes sense to use texting for because now you're not going to waste money on texts that don't ever get a response back. So it'll be more fiscally responsible and efficient to use texting for those things, those issues that are emotional, that are in the news, or have some relevant local tie that get people to go, okay, I'm interested. Some of the other methods, it's just, sure, I'll take a poll. But for texting, it's more than that. They're not just going to go, sure, I'll take a poll. It has to actually be something they care about. So that's great advice. I love that. Anything else in terms of like length, either number of questions or length of the questions, does that come into whether texting is a good option or a bad option?
In our experience where we've sent with the poll being done fully in text, it seems that there's just an extreme level of drop off if you go I would say around more than 10 questions. People just don't want to be sitting there on their phone texting with a stranger like, I'm unsure on this question. I'm supportive of this one. And it goes on and it can get very tiring on the recipient's end.
Yeah, especially text, even in text to web, is probably the same deal, as length is going to be a little bit more of a concern. So I think number of questions should come into play. If you've got a really long survey with the number of questions, texting might not be your best method. You might want to look to another method. I would also think, but you can tell me if I'm crazy, the length of the questions. Some of our clients have really long questions, some have shorter questions. I'd imagine the really long questions make it prohibitive to do this over a texting method as well, right?
Because no one wants to see a paragraph or read a novel in their text messages. It's just generally frowned upon in any sort of texting, whether we're talking about polling or just texting your friends.
Yeah. The one way I would spin this to a positive is if you've got something you're going to put on a ballot that you need them to read. This is where there's a benefit to it. I'll give you an example. We had a client who was running in a campaign. So this was for a political client. I know that's not most of you, but and the candidate they were running against had a really hard to pronounce name. We did the traditional phone polling for that race, and it found that they were winning the race handily. Well, on election day, they lost. And we were trying to think about what happened. Why did this happen? And one of the things, especially because the polls said we were way in the lead. And one of the things that we thought, that we tested and it proved to be true, is that a lot of people who took that poll heard the name of the opposition. They had never heard it before. They'd only ever seen it on signs and on different things. And so they said, no, I'm not going to support that candidate. They didn't know it was that same candidate. If we had taken that poll over text where they actually got to read the name and see it, I think the poll results would have actually been different because that's how they had seen it. They'd only seen it, not heard it. And so I think for situations where you need people to read something versus hear it, texting becomes a really valuable thing. Text or text to web is something you should utilize, whether maybe it's a ballot question if you're involved in a ballot initiative and you want them to see exactly what's going to be on the ballot. Reading it is how they're going to go vote. Most people aren't going to hear it unless they have like auditory support, which is very, very rare. And so they're going to read it. So think about, there could be some skew if they listen to the question versus if they read it. It's just sometimes how our brains work. So that might be a situation where you say, we want them to read this because when they vote, they're going to be reading it. And I'd like to have it be exactly how it is when they go vote. So I think there's some situations where reading it is a good thing and they should utilize it, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Which is why we always push for that mixed methodology. Because even within your results, you can compare how different methods performed and what changes between the two.
And that's something that we push, whether you use us or use somebody else, push for mixed methodology, because mixed methodology, say that 5 times fast, because ultimately what you want to ask them to do is compare the results and make sure there isn't a skew between the different methods. And so a good pollster is going to push you to use 2 or 3 different methods, and then you may never see this, but the first thing they're going to do is compare the results between those methods and make sure there isn't a significant skew from one to the other, because if there is, we got to stop and look at this and make sure that it looks okay. So it's a big thing right now in the industry, and especially with texting, it's a great way to work in another methodology within your response gathering that doesn't increase your costs too much. So that's one of the major benefits of texting.
Exactly.
All right, let's close with this. Any final thoughts for our organizations, for our polling partners on what they should be thinking about with texting, how they can utilize texting, or just something you want to reiterate as we close?
Well, as Collin said, it's slowly emerging and becoming a really effective way of gathering responses. So just keep it in mind as we go into the 2024 election season and just moving forward from here. I think it's going to be a huge part of the future in polling.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. And I'll close with this. Abe's an expert at this. We've got a whole team in place. For many of you, we've done polling with you. And please reach out to us. Let us help you with this. We've got other videos on all the different response gathering methods. You're welcome to poke around and learn a bit more. And then when you're ready, reach out. Let us help you with polling. We bring not only the data expertise, but the political expertise, the messaging, and the issue expertise. And so we're able to help you frame your messages, create your platform, what you're going to focus on, what you're going to push in the next upcoming state session or local session, what issues might play with voters. We're able to help you figure out all of that, both between our data expertise and our political expertise. So it's why a lot of policy shops around the country use us. Please, if you're not one of those, reach out to us. Let's work together in the coming months and years, and let's go get some wins. What do you think?
I'm in.
All right. Thanks for watching. We'll come back with more videos.